Tehran, Iran, November 2021. A man sits alone in an interrogation room deep beneath the Ministry of Intelligence headquarters. He has worked here for 11 years. He has conducted 847 interrogations in this exact room. He has broken foreign agents, exposed spy networks, and sent 17 men to their deaths based on confessions extracted within these walls. But tonight, for the first time, the man sitting in the interrogation chair is him. His name, or at least the name Iran's intelligence services believe is his name, is Colonel Davoud Rezaei. Head of Unit 8200, the Islamic Republic's most secretive counterintelligence division, tasked with one singular mission: identify and eliminate Mossad operatives inside Iran. For over a decade, he has been the hunter. Now, as the fluorescent lights flicker above him and 3 Revolutionary Guard officers enter the room carrying a file stamped with red Arabic script, he realizes the hunt has finally ended. But not in the way anyone expected, because Colonel Davoud Rezaei is not who he claims to be. And the unit he built to destroy Mossad was, from its very first day, controlled by Mossad itself. This is the story of the most audacious intelligence operation of the 21st century. How one man infiltrated the heart of an enemy nation, rose to command its most sensitive security apparatus, and turned an entire counterintelligence division into an asset of the very agency it was designed to destroy. It is a story of patience measured in decades, deception layered upon deception, and a betrayal so complete that even now, years later, Iranian intelligence officials refuse to publicly acknowledge its full scope. The man who would become Davoud Rezaei was born Yosef Mizrachi in Haifa, Israel, in 1971. His father was an Iraqi Jew who had fled Baghdad during the 1950s persecution. His mother was Persian, born in Shiraz before the revolution forced her family into exile. Yosef grew up bilingual, switching effortlessly between Hebrew and Farsi, absorbing the cadences and idioms of both languages until neither felt foreign. He was recruited by Mossad at 23, not through the usual channels of military intelligence or university talent spotting, but through something far more deliberate. A Mossad analyst reviewing immigration records noticed an anomaly: a young man with near-native Persian fluency, Iranian maternal lineage, and no existing intelligence connections. The analyst flagged the file. Within 6 months, Yosef Mizrachi had disappeared from Israeli society entirely. The training lasted 4 years. This was not the standard Mossad preparation of 6 months that produced field operatives for short-term missions. This was something else entirely. The program, known internally as Gilgul, the Hebrew word for reincarnation, was designed to create deep cover agents capable of operating for decades inside hostile nations. The methodology was borrowed from Soviet illegals programs, refined through decades of Israeli experience, and enhanced with psychological techniques developed specifically for long-term identity immersion. Yosef learned to forget himself. He studied the Quran with scholars who never knew his true religion. He memorized the geography of Tehran neighborhoods he had never visited. He absorbed the political grievances of the Islamic Republic until he could articulate them with genuine conviction. Psychologists worked with him weekly, gradually erasing the cognitive patterns that might betray his origin. The way Israelis gesture with their hands, the unconscious head movements that differ between cultures, the subtle variations in how laughter sounds when genuine versus performed. But here's the detail that would prove most important, and this is something intelligence historians still debate today. Yosef was not simply taught to impersonate an Iranian, he was conditioned to become one. The distinction matters. An impersonation can be detected under pressure. The micro-expressions of deception, the fractional hesitations before culturally specific responses, the 1,000 tiny inconsistencies that accumulate over years of observation. These can eventually betray even the most skilled performer. But genuine belief cannot be detected because there is nothing to detect. The legend becomes reality. The cover story becomes memory. In 1999, Davoud Rezaei arrived in Tehran. His backstory was meticulously constructed. Born in Mossad to a minor cleric's family, studied computer science in Germany during the 1990s, returned to Iran after becoming disillusioned with Western materialism. The documentation was flawless because it was not forged. Mossad had spent 3 years building the legend through authentic channels. The university transcripts were real, issued for a student who had actually existed but died in a car accident that was not entirely accidental. The family connections were real, cultivated through intermediaries who believed they were helping a genuine nephew reconnect with his roots. For 3 years, Davoud worked as a mid-level IT contractor, taking government contracts that gave him access to ministry networks without triggering security scrutiny. He married an Iranian woman, a devout believer who never suspected her husband's prayers were performances. They had 2 children. He coached his daughter's football team. He complained about traffic with his neighbors. He became invisible through ordinariness. The breakthrough came in 2002, when a colleague mentioned that the intelligence ministry was hiring technical specialists. Davoud applied. The security screening was extensive. Background investigators interviewed his neighbors, his university contacts in Germany, his family connections in Mossad. Everything checked out because everything had been built to check out. By early 2003, Davoud Rezaei was inside Iran's intelligence apparatus. And that's when the real operation began. The Islamic Republic's intelligence structure was, in 2003, still reeling from a series of catastrophic failures. Mossad had assassinated nuclear scientists with apparent impunity. Israeli operatives had photographed sensitive facilities that were supposed to be invisible to foreign surveillance. Worst of all, a network of informants within the Revolutionary Guards had been exposed not by Iranian counterintelligence, but by a defector's confession in the West. The supreme leader demanded accountability. More importantly, he demanded a solution. The result was Unit 8200, named deliberately to echo Israel's Signals Intelligence Division, a specialized counterintelligence task force with a singular focus: penetrate and destroy Mossad's networks inside Iran. Davoud Rezaei was not originally intended to lead this unit. He was a technical specialist, valued for his computer skills and methodical approach. But his rise was engineered with the same patience that had characterized his insertion. He solved problems others couldn't. He identified vulnerabilities in communication systems that more senior officers had missed. When an operation against a suspected Israeli cell in Isfahan went wrong, Davoud was the one who analyzed the failure and identified the procedural errors that had led to the compromise. By 2007, he was deputy commander of Unit 8200. By 2010, he was in charge. Consider what this meant operationally. The man responsible for hunting Mossad agents inside Iran was himself Mossad's most valuable asset. Every investigation, every surveillance operation, every interrogation passed through his office. He knew which suspects were genuine threats and which were innocent. He could steer investigations away from real assets and toward targets who were already compromised or entirely fictitious. But this created a paradox that Davoud had to navigate with extraordinary precision. He could not simply protect every Mossad operative. A counterintelligence unit that never caught anyone would itself become suspicious. Instead, he developed a methodology that his superiors praised as brilliant, and that was, in its own dark way, exactly that. He called it controlled failure. Periodically, he would identify genuine Israeli assets, but always those whose operational value had diminished or whose cover was already compromised beyond repair. He would orchestrate arrests, extract confessions, and deliver bodies to the executioners. Each success reinforced his credentials. Each Israeli agent he sacrificed became proof of his loyalty. The calculus was brutal. Mossad's commanders in Tel Aviv accepted the losses as the price of a much greater prize. The agents who died understood the risks they had taken. The operation required sacrifice, and Davoud made sure the sacrifices were strategically optimal. But here's what made his position truly extraordinary, something that wasn't fully understood until years after his extraction. Davoud wasn't just protecting existing Mossad networks, he was building new ones. Between 2010 and 2018, Unit 8200 recruited 23 new members. Each was vetted through standard intelligence protocols, background checks, polygraph examinations, family investigations, ideological assessments. Each passed, and 17 of them were Mossad assets. How was this possible? The answer reveals the terrifying depth of the infiltration. Davoud controlled the vetting process. Not directly, which would have been too obvious, but through subtle manipulations that shaped outcomes without leaving fingerprints. He would identify the most promising candidates, the ones with genuine anti-Western grievances and authentic revolutionary credentials, and then find reasons to reject them. a distant cousin with suspicious travel patterns, an inconsistency in a childhood school record, a psychological profile that suggested potential instability. Meanwhile, candidates who had been carefully prepared by Mossad's Gilgul program would sail through. Their legends were built to survive precisely the kind of scrutiny Davoud's unit applied because Davoud had helped design that scrutiny. He knew which questions would be asked and which answers would satisfy. The process was self-reinforcing. Mossad assets who passed vetting became colleagues who vouched for future Mossad assets. By 2015, Unit 8200 had become in effect a subsidiary of Israeli intelligence operating with Iranian government funding and legal authority. The intelligence product was staggering. These weren't low-level informants passing along gossip. These were officers with access to the most sensitive facilities in Iran. They photographed documents in secure vaults. They recorded conversations with nuclear program administrators. They provided real-time updates on security protocols at research facilities, enabling operations that would have otherwise been impossible. The 2018 archive theft, in which Mossad operatives removed over 100,000 pages of nuclear program documentation from a Tehran warehouse, was partly enabled by intelligence unit 8200 had provided. The irony was exquisite. Iranian counterintelligence had supplied the operational data that made the breach possible. And here's the detail that still haunts Iranian security officials. During this entire period, Unit 8200 was producing intelligence reports for Iranian leadership about Israeli capabilities and intentions. Those reports were largely accurate, detailed assessments of Mossad operations and vulnerabilities. But they were also carefully calibrated to mislead. They exaggerated Israeli weaknesses in areas where Iran was already investing resources, encouraging strategic misdirection. They downplayed Israeli capabilities in areas that mattered, creating blind spots that Israeli operatives could exploit. The Supreme Leader received these briefings personally. He praised Unit 8200's analytical rigor. He increased their budget. He trusted their conclusions. Every one of those conclusions had been shaped, directly or indirectly, by Tel Aviv. The investigation that would ultimately expose Davoud Rezaei did not begin in Iran. It began in Germany, in the office of a BND analyst reviewing communication intercepts from a seemingly unrelated case. In late 2019, German intelligence was tracking a suspected Iranian procurement network operating in Munich. The network was purchasing dual-use technologies, equipment that could have legitimate industrial applications, but could also be used in weapons programs. Standard counter-proliferation work. But one detail caught the analyst's attention. A communication between network members referenced a friend in the house who could ensure their shipments wouldn't be flagged by Iranian customs inspections. The phrase suggested someone inside Iran's security apparatus was providing cover for the operation. But the procurement network was already compromised. German authorities had penetrated it months earlier. If someone inside Iranian intelligence was protecting this network, they were protecting an operation that their enemies already controlled. The analyst flagged the inconsistency. BND shared the intelligence with partner agencies, including, through carefully monitored channels, elements of Iranian intelligence not connected to Unit 8200. What happened next remains classified in multiple countries, but the broad outlines have emerged through leaks and subsequent investigations. Iranian counterintelligence, specifically officers outside Unit 8200's chain of command, began a quiet investigation. They were not looking for Mossad infiltrators. They were looking for corruption, officers using their positions to facilitate smuggling operations for personal profit. But what they found was something far more disturbing. Financial records showed unexplained deposits in accounts linked to Unit 8200 personnel. Not large amounts which might have been dismissed as corruption, but small regular payments that followed patterns inconsistent with typical bribery schemes. Communication analysis revealed encrypted channels that Unit 8200's own systems couldn't decrypt, suggesting someone was using technology more sophisticated than anything Iranian intelligence possessed. And then there was the operational pattern. Over an 18-month period, investigators cataloged every case Unit 8200 had pursued. They found that investigations targeting genuine Israeli assets had an unusually high failure rate. Technical problems, procedural errors, suspects who mysteriously fled the country before arrests could be made. Meanwhile, cases that ended in successful prosecutions followed a different pattern. The targets were often individuals with minimal actual intelligence value, pawns sacrificed to maintain appearances. The statistical analysis was damning. The probability of such patterns occurring by chance was less than 1 in 10,000. By mid-2021, Iranian investigators had narrowed their suspicion to 3 individuals within Unit 8200's leadership. Davoud Rezaei was not initially the primary suspect. His operational record appeared too clean, his personal life too ordinary. But when investigators began examining his communication patterns in detail, they noticed something curious. Every 2 weeks, Davoud took an afternoon walk through a specific neighborhood in northern Tehran. The walks followed no obvious pattern except their timing. Surveillance teams followed him on 7 separate occasions and observed nothing unusual. He bought coffee. He browsed bookstores. He fed pigeons in a park. But analysis of his phone's location data against other devices in the same areas revealed an anomaly. On each walk, another phone, registered to a German business consultant who had never actually entered Iran, appeared within 500 meters of Davoud's location for exactly 12 minutes. The phones never approached each other directly. The pattern was consistent with a brush pass, a classic espionage technique for exchanging materials without direct contact. When investigators examined the German consultant's communications, they found encrypted messages routed through servers in Azerbaijan. The routing was designed to obscure the message's final destination. But Iranian cyber specialists, working with assistance from Russian intelligence, eventually traced the traffic to a reception point in Tel Aviv. The trap was set. Davoud Rezaei was arrested on November 15, 2021, during what he believed was a routine security meeting. The Revolutionary Guard officers who took him into custody had been briefed only that morning, their phones confiscated to prevent any warning from reaching the suspect. The interrogation lasted 12 days. Davoud maintained his cover for the first 3, denying everything, expressing outrage at the accusation, demanding to speak with superiors who he knew were already under arrest. But Iranian interrogators had learned from past failures. They didn't need a confession to convict. They had documentation. And they had something else. 2 of the 17 Mossad assets Davoud had recruited had been identified through separate channels and were themselves providing testimony. On the 4th day, Davoud stopped denying and started negotiating. What happened next remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in contemporary intelligence history. Official Iranian sources claim Davoud confessed fully and was executed in early 2022. But multiple intelligence agencies have concluded that this narrative is false. The evidence suggests that Davoud offered Iranian interrogators something they valued more than his death: a complete map of Mossad's operational methodology inside Iran. Names, locations, communication protocols, dead drops, emergency extraction procedures. He offered to give them everything, but only if they guaranteed his family's safety and allowed them to leave the country. Iranian officials faced an impossible choice: execute Davoud and make a public example, but lose the intelligence he could provide, or accept his terms, gain invaluable operational knowledge, and admit to their own population that they had been catastrophically penetrated for over a decade. They chose secrecy. Davoud's family was quietly relocated to Turkey under guard, their departure explained as a routine medical trip. Davoud himself was moved between detention facilities, each transfer officially recorded as an execution to satisfy bureaucratic requirements while keeping him alive for continued debriefings. But Mossad had anticipated this scenario. Davoud's emergency protocols had been activated the moment investigators began their surveillance. His family's relocation to Turkey was not an Iranian decision, but the conclusion of an extraction operation that had been running parallel to his arrest. The Turkish intelligence service, maintaining its complex relationship with both Iran and Israel, provided a narrow window. A border crossing that was briefly unmanned. A vehicle with diplomatic plates. A safe house in Istanbul where a team of Mossad officers waited. Davoud Rezaei, the identity he had worn for 22 years, ceased to exist on a cold January night in 2022. Yosef Mizrachi, the man who had become that identity, walked through a door into a new life. The intelligence he provided during his final debriefings in Turkey filled 17 binders. The operational knowledge he had accumulated, the understanding of Iranian intelligence methods and vulnerabilities developed over 2 decades of working inside their most sensitive unit, was considered so valuable that Mossad's director personally supervised the initial interviews. Iran eventually discovered the extraction but was unable to prevent it. They issued an Interpol red notice for Davoud Rezaei that they knew would never result in an arrest. They executed 3 officers they claimed had facilitated his escape, and they began the slow, painful process of assessing the damage. The assessment took years and is likely still ongoing. Every Operation Unit 8200 had conducted during Davoud's tenure had to be re-examined. Every recruit had to be re-vetted. Every intelligence product had to be re-evaluated for potential contamination. Former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad would eventually acknowledge the penetration in a 2024 interview, though he understated its scope. He admitted that the head of Iran's counter-Mossad unit had been an Israeli agent. He admitted that 20 subordinates had also been compromised. What he didn't say, what Iranian officials have never publicly acknowledged, is how long the penetration had lasted, how deep it had run, or how much damage it had caused. Yosef Mizrachi lives today under a new identity in a country that Israeli intelligence services have not disclosed. He is 63 years old. He spent more than half his adult life as someone else, in a country that would have killed him if his true identity had been discovered even one day earlier. His children, born in Iran to an Iranian mother who believed her husband was a faithful servant of the Islamic Republic, have struggled to understand what their father was. The daughter he coached at football, now an adult, reportedly refused to speak to him for 3 years after learning the truth. The reconciliation, if it has occurred, happened in private. His former colleagues in Tehran, those who survived the purge that followed his exposure, faced their own reckoning. Some were genuine Iranian patriots who worked alongside a man they trusted, never suspecting his true allegiance. Others were fellow Mossad assets who maintained their cover even as Davoud was extracted, continuing to operate in diminished capacity until their own extractions could be arranged. The operational impact is still being assessed by intelligence analysts worldwide. The documents stolen in the 2018 archive operation influenced international negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. The intelligence provided by Unit 8200 assets enabled sabotage operations that set back Iranian weapons development by years. The penetration of Iran's counterintelligence structure created vulnerabilities that Israeli operatives continue to exploit long after Davoud's departure. But perhaps the most significant impact was psychological. The Davoud Rezaei case demonstrated something that Iranian security officials had feared but never fully confronted: that their most secure institutions could be penetrated at the highest levels for extended periods without detection. That the officer asking questions in the interrogation room might himself be the enemy. That trust itself had become a vulnerability. This paranoia, some analysts argue, has made Iranian intelligence services simultaneously more suspicious and less effective. Officers who might once have worked collaboratively now view colleagues with wariness. Information sharing has decreased as compartmentalization has increased. The very measures designed to prevent future penetrations have created new inefficiencies that can themselves be exploited. The invisible war continues. New assets are being developed, new operations are being planned. Somewhere, another Yosef Mizrachi is learning to become someone else, preparing for a journey into an identity that will consume decades of their life. Intelligence work operates in moral darkness. The men and women who conduct these operations make choices that cannot be justified by ordinary ethical frameworks. They lie to people who trust them. They maintain families built on deception. They sacrifice colleagues when operational necessity demands it. They become, in the deepest sense, different people, not just wearing masks, but becoming the masks they wear. Davoud Rezaei lived this reality for 22 years. He prayed in mosques to a God he did not worship. He raised children in a faith he had been conditioned to simulate. He sent men to their deaths knowing they were innocent of the charges his unit had fabricated against them. Was it worth it? The question assumes there's a calculus that can weigh such costs against such benefits. National security professionals would point to intelligence victories, operations enabled, lives saved through sabotage that prevented weapons from being built. Critics would point to the human wreckage, the innocents executed, the families destroyed, the corrosive effect of institutionalized deception on everyone who participates in it. The truth is probably that both assessments are correct. that the operation was simultaneously a remarkable achievement of intelligence tradecraft and a moral catastrophe for everyone it touched. That nations do these things because nations have always done these things. That the invisible war follows rules no parliament ever approved and no court ever adjudicated. Yosef Mizrachi, the man who was Davoud Rezaei, does not give interviews. He does not write memoirs. He has disappeared into a final identity, one that perhaps, after so many transformations, he cannot distinguish from himself. The fluorescent lights still flicker in that interrogation room beneath Tehran. Other men sit in the chair where Davoud once sat, facing questions from officers who wonder now whether they can trust the colleague asking those questions. The suspicion never ends. The operation never truly concludes. And somewhere, the invisible war continues. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this investigation into the darkest corners of modern espionage changed how you see international relations, hit that like button. Subscribe because we're exposing operations that governments deny and the machinery of power that operates in perpetual shadow. Hit the notification bell. The next buried operation is already unfolding somewhere, waiting to be revealed.